The crystal shattered before the applause even died. 1 second, a hall of veterans and families rose with their glasses, honoring the career of Colonel Evelyn Marks, the first woman to command an armored brigade in U.S. Army history. The next, her father's hand slammed his bourbon tumbler against the hardwood floor, shards scattering like shrapnel. The American Legion Hall went silent. Flags hung motionless as though even the air refused to move. 220 pairs of eyes fixed on the man at the center of the outburst, Charles Marks, Clayton County construction tycoon, a man more accustomed to ribbon cuttings than reveille. His voice cut through the silence, thick with disdain and liquor. "Those medals are nothing but costume jewelry. Take them off, Evelyn. You're humiliating the family name." The words hit harder than any artillery round she had faced overseas. Evelyn stood at parade rest, her Class A uniform immaculate, ribbons aligned with the precision of a drill sergeant's whistle. The silence stretched, taut as barbed wire. Then came the movement. Charles raised his hand, a gesture meant to silence, to command as if fatherly authority could still reach a daughter who had stared down mortars in Helmand Province. The crowd gasped, folding chairs creaked, but before the blow could land, another hand intercepted. Michael Rourke, Navy captain, full bird, fiancé. His grip was steady, iron under white gloves. His eyes held none of Charles's fury, only a cold, immovable calm, the calm of a man who had stood the mid-watch on a carrier deck, who had saluted flag-draped coffins under rain. He leaned in, voice low but deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of rank, sacrifice, and truth. "You just struck a decorated U.S. Army colonel." 8 words, no more, no less. But they detonated inside the hall. The veterans knew what it meant. The younger officers in the crowd felt it like a command. Even the civilians recognized the authority in those syllables. Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood taller, steel in her spine, eyes unblinking. The echo of the shattered glass lingered like the last round of a 21-gun salute. And yet, this wasn't just about a bourbon glass or a father's hand. It was decades in the making. But to understand why that single moment silenced the room, you need to know what came before. Charles Marks had built his empire with concrete, steel, and the blood of non-union laborers. Clayton County knew his name as well as it knew its highways. Every golf course, clubhouse, and courthouse annex seemed to bear a brass plaque engraved with Marks' construction and development. To the men at the American Legion bar, Charles was the kind of businessman who never carried cash but always carried grudges. His worth was tallied in profit margins and 18-hole scores at Augusta, not in sacrifice or scars. At home, the empire felt colder still. Their Georgian mansion gleamed like a monument to glass and stone, but inside, affection was rationed like quarterly dividends. Supper conversations weren't about feelings or faith. They were about balance sheets, new contracts in Masonville, and which politician could be leaned on in Clayton County. Charles wore his gray suits like armor and his 9-iron like a scepter, measuring his children's futures by which country club they would inherit. Evelyn never fit that script. While her brothers polished golf swings under the live oaks, Evelyn found herself drawn to the sound of cadence calls echoing from the high school's JROTC field. Those rhythmic chants, left, right, left, struck something deep, something her father's boardroom could never reach. On humid Georgia evenings, when the cicadas buzzed loud enough to drown out his lectures about IPOs, she would stand at her bedroom window, eyes locked on the flagpole at the school across the street. The stars and stripes snapped in the twilight wind like it was calling her name. Charles noticed. He always noticed. "Service is for servants," he sneered one night, swirling bourbon in his glass while Evelyn tried to explain why she wanted to attend a summer leadership camp. "Mark's men build empires. We don't salute them." The word salute carried the same venom in his mouth as the word failure. To him, uniforms meant submission, a lowering of the head before some colonel barking orders. To Evelyn, those same uniforms meant belonging, discipline, purpose. It was the first of many chasms that would yawn wider with each passing year. His empire rose higher, tall glass towers in downtown Atlanta that mirrored the sky but reflected nothing of the ground. Her world, meanwhile, was forged lower in mud and sweat, the scuffed leather of boots pounding a parade ground, the metallic taste of early morning runs, the cadence of voices unified in purpose, not profit. Father and daughter became symbols of two Americas, one that worshipped money and appearances, and another that clung to duty and honor. Charles measured a man by his golf handicap. Evelyn measured herself by whether she could carry another cadet's pack without breaking stride. At the dinner table, Charles would boast about a new development deal, while Evelyn sat silent, fingers tracing the edges of her JROTC manual under the cloth. She learned quickly that voicing her dreams of West Point or of commanding troops was like tossing gasoline on an open flame. His voice would rise, his jaw would clench, and his verdict always the same. Soldiers take orders, CEOs give them. Don't waste your life being saluted, Evelyn. Be the one people bow to. She never bowed. Instead, she began to carve her identity in opposition to his. Every time he boasted of profits, she thought of the cadence call, sound off, 1 to 2. Every time he lifted a golf trophy, she pictured herself lifting a rucksack heavier than her own frame, and every time he told her that military life was beneath her, she imagined the sound of boots on asphalt, the drumbeat of belonging she'd already chosen. His empire might have reached into the clouds, but hers had already begun on the ground, solid, scarred, and unyielding. Clayton County summers have a particular weight to them, heat that presses the house into silence and turns cicadas into a metronome. Our place on the hill looked like it had been airdropped from a glossy magazine. White columns, a lawn shaved like a marine's high and tight, a stone entryway that echoed when you walked. A museum, really. We lived among exhibits, bronze eagles on pedestals, framed contracts in the study, golf trophies lined up like a minor pantheon. The only thing rationed more tightly than our father's approval was affection. It came quarterly, if at all, and always with performance metrics attached. At night, when the house finally exhaled, my mother would sit on the edge of my bed and read lyrics, the way other mothers read prayers. Conway Twitty smuggled past my father's disdain for anything that didn't contribute to a ledger. It's only make-believe. She'd smile soft, conspiratorial, and whisper, "Don't let him measure your worth, Evie. Numbers are for buildings, not for hearts." Then she'd tuck a lock of hair behind my ear and turn out the light. The hall's motion sensor waking lamps in sequence like runway beacons, a reminder that even our darkness had a security plan. I was 12 the first time my paper beat me home. I'd written about the USS Missouri, how steel had a memory, how you could read history in rivets and war in welds, how a surrender signed on her deck could end one world and start another. A perfect score in red ink stood at attention in the top corner. I slid the paper across the dinner table like a medal. My father glanced once, then folded it in half without creasing it. He hated wrinkles, dropped it beside his plate, and said, "A waste of brain cells." He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. He ruled with posture, with silence that turned air to glass. "If you want to learn about something worth owning," he added, "look at the deed to our new tower downtown, not some museum boat." I didn't mention that the Missouri wasn't a museum in my head. It was a country you carried aboard. It was discipline, the difference between steel and show. That night, I pulled the paper from the garbage and smoothed it flat on my desk, tracing the A+ like it could be a compass. By 13, I had discovered the language my father didn't speak: cadence. The JROTC platoon ran drills on the high school football field 2 blocks over, and their calls floated up through the live oaks, cutting through humidity and doubt, left, 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 right, left. Even their silence felt coordinated, the kind of quiet that means attention, not fear. I started showing up early, long before homeroom, to watch the first formation. The instructor would snap, "Fall in!" and the bodies would become a single shape. It took me a week to ask for the form. I didn't take it home. I knew the outcome. I forged my mother's signature with shaking hands and a dictionary of guilt. Then got up before dawn and learned to tie my hair so it fit under a cap. The first time I stood in rank, my knees buzzed and my lungs found a new rhythm. At parade rest, I learned what it felt like to be still on purpose. On Memorial Day, we practiced rest on arms, reversed the rifle across the front, muzzle down funeral honors drilled into muscle memory. I hadn't earned a uniform worth saluting, but I had started to earn the right to stand still and mean it. Meanwhile, the house performed its ritual worship of golf. My brothers tuned their swings in the backyard as if the family name were something you drove down a fairway. They whispered about Augusta like a shrine and practiced a slow, cruel smile my father favored whenever a deal tilted his way. On Saturday mornings, he'd shepherd them into the SUV, irons clattering like silverware. "You coming, Evie?" he'd call, already knowing the answer. I'd pat the pocket where I kept a folded drill card and say, "I've got practice." "Practice for what?" he'd say. "Taking orders?" Practice for a language where orders meant trust, where someone's voice could be a bridge across chaos. But I never said that part out loud. The day the worlds collided wasn't dramatic. No shattered glass, no raised hand, just a blistering afternoon. The kind Georgia saves for football and bad ideas. Our JROTC unit was marching the sideline, the white lines heat-waving, the bleachers empty except for a groundskeeper, and of course, my father. He'd come to pick up my brothers from a lesson and wandered over, curiosity or surveillance, I never knew. We were practicing column right, march, and my heel caught on a divot. I recovered before the squad broke step, but I saw him, saw the smirk. When the instructor called dismissed, my father waved me over. "Want to know the difference between you and your brothers?" he said, not waiting for an answer. He pointed to the green beyond the fence, where my brothers were mimicking pros in slow motion. "They'll sign checks. You'll salute people who sign checks." He tapped my cover with one finger. "That hat makes you small." I took it off and held it behind my back so he couldn't touch it again. "This hat keeps me from being smaller than I was yesterday," I said, shocked to hear my own voice hold a line. He laughed without humor. "We'll see how long this phase lasts. Phases don't wake you at 0500 to run in air you could drink. They don't blister your heels until the skin learns the shape of a boot. They don't teach you how to stand a watch during a downpour without hating rain." The first time I lashed a poncho to my pack and learned the difference between at ease and parade rest, I felt something click, like a gear that had been searching for its partner. Sophomore year, I sent away for a West Point brochure using a prepaid envelope I'd hidden in a trig book. The packet arrived with the kind of paper that feels like it means something. Photos of the Hudson in winter, cadets in gray, an eagle perched on the shoulder of a future no one could give you. You had to take it. I taped one picture inside my closet and stared at it every time I buttoned a shirt that wasn't a uniform. When I finally told my parents, I did it after dinner, when the dishwasher drowned out small cowardices. My mother reached for my hand under the table. My father reached for a towel and wiped an imaginary spot from the granite. "West Point," he said, tasting the words like they might stain. "Yes, sir." The sir slipped out of habit from drill polite, not submissive. He set the towel down and folded his arms. "If you step into that academy, don't expect me at graduation." I nodded like a soldier accepting a hard truth. Inside, a small, precise pain took notes. That night my mother knocked once and came in. No Conway Twitty. Just the hush of a woman who already knew how stories like this end and begin. She pressed something into my palm. A thin gold necklace with a tiny eagle charm, barely bigger than a thumbnail. "He doesn't own the sky," she whispered. "Don't let him tell you otherwise." The day the broken golf club became a relic was an accident masquerading as an omen. My father had insisted that I attend a charity round in Masonville, all smiles and handshakes and how-do-you-dos, a parade ground of a different sort. He placed a driver in my hands like a prop. "Just swing," he said. "It's not calculus." But it was. It was vectors and mass and torque, and the first swing split the ball wide. The second swing found something buried under the manicured green, a root, a bone of the earth, and the driver snapped clean near the neck. The head sailed forward like a slow confession. Silence. Then a chorus of polite exclamations. I stood there holding a shaft that was suddenly lighter, suddenly honest. My father's face went hard, the way concrete sets. Clumsy. I carried the broken club home like contraband. In my room, I leaned it in the corner and stared at it until its outline began to mean something else. It was the shape of a choice. I could learn to swing the way he wanted, or I could learn to carry weight he'd never choose. I kept the club. When the fear of being less than his idea of me flared, I'd look at it and remember. I would never swing my life like he wanted. Junior year, I was invited to a leadership camp up near the Tennessee border, long climbs, land nav at night, a taste of what mountain air could do to your lungs. My father said, "No, you'll shadow me at the firm." My mother said nothing, but her eyes said, "Go." I left a note and caught a ride with a senior who smelled like peppermint gum and determination. We learned to orient maps by a sky that didn't care if you were rich or right. I got back with boots that had learned mud and a spine that had learned a different definition of upright. We fought quietly that time. He withheld more than words allowance. Rides, that crooked half-approval he rationed like a rare spice. I worked weekends stocking shelves at a hardware store in Jonesboro, learning the names of things that hold other things together. Screws don't care about family politics. They either bite or they don't. By senior year, I stopped asking permission. I requested an interview with my congressional representative for a nomination slot. I ironed a white blouse that might as well have been armor and memorized answers that weren't lies. When the nomination came, I took the long way home past the high school field. The drill team was practicing colors. I stood at the fence and watched the flag climb. If anyone had asked why I was crying, I would have said wind. The acceptance letter arrived in a beige envelope with a shield in the corner. I held it to the kitchen light and saw the outline of my future like a watermark. My mother opened it with me in the pantry, because some joys are too tender for rooms where men keep trophies. We laughed before we read a single line. Then we read every word like it was oxygen. At dinner, I placed the letter at my father's place, as if it were an offering. He slid it aside as if it weren't combustible. "So you're serious about this?" he said. Not a question. Understand, you walk down that path, you walk it alone. Alone is a word that changes meaning depending on what boots you're wearing. Alone on a parade ground is being part of a formation too large to see. Alone at our dinner table meant you were excommunicated from a church whose God was prophet. I cleared my plate and did the dishes with hands that shook only after the water ran. In the weeks before I left, Clayton County looked different. The American Legion Hall I'd driven past 1,000 times became more than a blue sign. It became a harbor. The courthouse annex with Mark's Construction and Development in brass letters glinted like a warning. I packed light and took the broken club last, sliding it along the wall of the box like a rib. On the morning I left for the academy, my mother hugged me so long the clock blinked twice. My father shook my hand, looking somewhere near my shoulder, as if my face might indict him. "Don't call me to come bail you out when you realize you're not built for it," he said. "I won't," I told him. I meant it as a promise, not a threat. The road out of Clayton County runs past the high school. The flag was at half-staff for a local firefighter that day, and for a mile I drove with the taste of grief and hope, sharing a cup. When the county line sign flashed by, I checked the mirror. The house on the hill had already shrunk to an idea, but the cadence stayed. Left, 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 right, left. I didn't know yet the shapes that discipline would take: mud, frost, MREs eaten with humility, NCOs who could turn chaos into a teachable moment with a single at ease. I didn't know that one day, in a hall 2 states away, the sound of a crystal glass shattering would carry me back to every choice that led there. I knew only this: his empire lived in glass towers that reflect themselves. Mine would be built in places where reflection is what you do between orders. And when the time came to stand still and be counted, I would. The first note of discipline is always time. At West Point, the bugle didn't just wake you, it judged you. 0430 meant boots on the floor, bed tight enough to bounce a quarter, brass polished until it gleamed like a signal fire. The Hudson Valley in February has teeth. It bit every inch of exposed skin when we formed up in gray overcoats and learned that cadence wasn't just sound, it was survival. Left, 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 right, left. Our breath froze mid-air, a choir of ghosts chanting us into the future. Beast barracks stripped us raw. Think daddy's money gets you through this? An instructor sneered on day 3. Eyes sharp, voice serrated. Your last name doesn't carry sandbags. They didn't know that my last name carried weight of another kind, expectations so heavy I'd come here to break them. It worked. Week by week, the arrogance fell away. Replaced by muscle memory and bruises, you stopped counting. By semester's end, I no longer flinched at 0430. My body rose before the bugle, conditioned by the rhythm of duty. The academy years were steel. Forged hot, hammered cold. I learned to salute sharply enough to slice silence. To drill until at ease felt like a luxury. To study Clausewitz by lamplight while my hands smelled of gun oil. I carried that cadence into the deserts of Iraq, the valleys of Helmand, the dust storms of Syria. On convoy routes, the night became a second enemy. Radio static thrummed like a heartbeat, a reminder that silence could mean safe passage or ambush. Headlights cut tunnels through sand while the sky hung heavy, indifferent. You learn to count not miles, but breaths, each one a small contract with tomorrow. Respect came slowly, as it always does in the military. At first, the sergeants called me ma'am, with edges sharp as sarcasm. But after Helmand, after I dragged Corporal Ruiz from a burning Humvee and refused the stretcher despite shrapnel in my thigh, the tone shifted. The next morning, Gunny Hill barked Admiral on deck. When I entered the tent, the squad snapped to attention, grins hidden under dirt and exhaustion. From then on, ma'am carried reverence, not mockery. Hill became family in a way blood had never managed. He had a voice that could command a hurricane, but he saved it for moments that mattered. To halt panic, to remind us that steadiness could be louder than rage. And then there was Captain Michael Rourke. The first time we crossed paths was in Kuwait, a joint logistics briefing thick with acronyms and bad coffee. I was walking through convoy assignments, red pen bleeding across maps, when he leaned over after and said, "You don't move tanks, you move lives." I thought it was flattery. It wasn't. It was recognition spoken in the plain, unadorned tone of a man who'd seen enough to know the difference. We circled each other for months, briefings in dusty tents, operations stitched together on too little sleep. He carried calm like other men carried sidearms. No chest thumping. No need to fill silence. The first time he asked me to dinner, it wasn't a candlelit performance. It was a Waffle House off I-75, fluorescent lights humming, syrup-stained menus stuck to the table. He didn't ask me to be less. He asked how I kept men calm under fire. "Duty," I said. "No," he corrected gently. "Trust. Don't sell yourself short." That night, in the clatter of dishes and Conway Twitty on the jukebox, I realized respect could be quiet. It didn't need bourbon or brass plaques. It could sit across from you in uniform, eyes steady, asking questions because the answers mattered. Meanwhile, back in Georgia, silence grew thicker than the kudzu. My father never called after Iraq, never wrote after Helmand. The packages that arrived bore his handwriting, but inside were clipped business articles. Your brother's new real estate development breaks ground. A sticky note once read, "This is success." I tore it in half without ceremony. I stopped sending updates. My career unfolded without his gaze, and I found I didn't need it. Every promotion pinned to my shoulder was proof enough. Each salute from a non-commissioned officer was louder than any golf clap. By the time I wore oak leaves, then eagles, the gap between us was an ocean. His empire reflected glass towers into the sky. Mine reflected in the eyes of soldiers who trusted me to stand when others broke. I didn't know it yet, but every convoy, every briefing, every 0430 wake-up was leading to that night in Masonville, the Legion Hall, where bourbon would shatter and silence would fall. The American Legion Hall in Masonville smelled of floor polish and history. Flags lined the walls, their edges heavy with dust and memory, while a brass band tuned in the corner, the notes of Anchor's Outweighs clashing against the muffled shuffle of folding chairs. 220 guests filled the room. Generals in dress blues, ribbons, thick as biographies across their chests, old veterans in Legion caps, their faces etched with years of smoke-filled VFW halls, and CEOs in tailored suits, power ties gleaming under fluorescent lights. Colonel Evelyn Marks stood at the front in her Class A uniform, the weight of an armored brigade's legacy pressed into every ribbon pinned to her chest. Tonight was supposed to be a farewell to service, a ceremony of respect. She had carried tanks through deserts and soldiers through fire. But respect is fragile when family refuses to see it. The toast had just been raised when Charles Marks pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against the floorboards was louder than the band. He rose slow, deliberate, bourbon glass in hand, the amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Every eye turned. His voice carried that particular southern drawl he weaponized in boardrooms, smooth but edged with disdain. "Take off those silly medals, Evelyn," he said. "You're embarrassing the Marks name." The words fell heavy, shattering the rhythm of the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd, civilians blinking in confusion, veterans narrowing their eyes. Evelyn didn't move. She stood at parade rest, spine straight, chin lifted just enough to signal that the words hadn't broken her. Charles wasn't finished. He downed the last of his bourbon and, with a sneer, hurled the glass to the floor. Crystal shattered, echoing like a rifle crack. He stepped forward, bourbon still on his breath, and raised his hand. The motion was quick, but not quicker than the man standing beside her. Captain Michael Rourke, Navy full bird, intercepted mid-swing. His grip locked around Charles's wrist with the kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself. Calm radiated from him, steadier than any brass band, sharper than any blade. He leaned in just close enough for the front rows to hear. "You just struck a decorated U.S. Army colonel." 8 words, delivered without shout, without flourish. But the effect was electric. Veterans in Legion, caps snapped to their feet, instinct sharper than age. Their salutes came crisp, practiced, reflexive. Generals followed, polished shoes scraping as they rose. Even the civilians, clumsy and awkward, mimicked the gesture, raising hands to brows or hearts. The hall transformed in an instant, no longer a retirement party but a formation, united by judgment. The brass band fell silent, instruments lowered, as if even music deferred to the moment. Evelyn stood still, her medals catching fractured light from the ceiling fixtures. She had never looked taller. Charles Marks, the man who built glass towers in Atlanta and commanded rooms with arrogance alone, stood pale and trembling. His jaw tightened, his face drained of color. The hand once raised in dominance now hung trapped in another man's grip, reduced to something fragile, breakable. The silence thickened until it became verdict. The daughter he had dismissed as weak now commanded the room by simply standing in it. The empire of money and golf trophies had collapsed under the weight of honor freely given. Rourke released his grip slowly, deliberately, as though handling something already broken. Charles stumbled half a step backward. Around him, no one moved to help. Evelyn turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. No anger, no plea. Just the calm of a soldier who had endured worse and survived. In that gaze was a lifetime of defiance. Every cadence call, every convoy, every scar pinned invisibly beside the visible ribbons. The hall exhaled as one, a collective breath of judgment. The salute held, veterans and civilians alike frozen in solidarity. For the first time in his life, Charles Marks had no words. Charles Marks left the Legion Hall the same way he ruled his empire, without apology. He slipped out a side door before the cake was cut, his tuxedo jacket hanging loose, his shoulders hunched under a weight money could never buy off. No farewell, no speech, no handshake for the generals who had flown in, or the veterans who had once worked his job sites. Just the shuffle of leather soles and the faint smell of bourbon trailing after him. The reception resumed, but not as it had been planned. Whispers ran like currents through the room. Did you see? Did you hear? Some spoke of the shattered glass, others of the 8 words Captain Rourke delivered like a court-martial verdict. But no one doubted the outcome. The richest man in Clayton County had been humbled by silence, by salutes, by a daughter who had chosen steel over glass. Evelyn stood quietly near the podium, the weight of her medals pressing against her chest. She reached up, almost unconsciously, and brushed her fingers over the eagle insignia pinned to her shoulder, the silver spread of wings that marked her as a full-bird colonel. Her father had once said, hats made her small. Yet this eagle told a different story, that she had risen high enough to see over his towers, strong enough to endure storms he had never faced. In that moment, she understood the divide with crystalline clarity. His empire had been built on contracts, signatures, intimidation, the brittle authority of men who feared silence. Hers had been built on convoy routes and frozen mornings at West Point, on scars hidden beneath fabric, and on the steady hands of soldiers who trusted her to stand when others might break. One empire reflected itself in glass. The other carried weight in flesh and loyalty. She turned her gaze back to the audience, rows of uniforms and suits. Some eyes misted, some jaws set firm. Respect wasn't in the trophies her father paraded at Augusta. It wasn't in the balance sheets framed on the walls of his downtown office. It lived here, in the way Gunnery Sergeant Hill's salute stayed sharp despite his prosthetic leg, in the way old veterans with shaky hands still raised them high, in the way even civilians stood awkwardly but sincerely. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. You can't buy it with money or intimidate it out of a boardroom. You can only stand for it day after day, mile after mile until others rise beside you. Later, outside under the cooling Virginia night, Evelyn breathed deep. The air smelled of cedar and faint gunpowder from the evening's ceremonial volleys. Michael stood beside her, steady as ever, his presence an anchor. He touched her arm gently. "You don't need his approval," he said. "I never did," she replied, and for the first time she felt the truth of it in her bones. The hall behind them buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking again, stories of campaigns and deployments rising louder than any businessman's toast. Evelyn didn't look back toward the door her father had used. His absence no longer stung. It was simply a space vacated, leaving room for something stronger. She adjusted her uniform, fingers brushing the eagle once more, then faced the flag that still hung at the end of the hall. The stars and stripes shifted gently in the night draft, a reminder that honor didn't whisper in stock tickers, it thundered in sacrifice. And so the lesson is left for you. If you've ever stood tall when someone tried to cut you down, Remember, your worth isn't measured by their approval. It's written in what you endure, in the truth you refuse to take off, no matter who demands it. Leave your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that respect isn't bought, it's earned. And if you want more tales where betrayal becomes strength and silence becomes solidarity, subscribe, because together we rise.